Welcome to this edition of Peak Performance Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performers Podcast. I'm your host, Thor Conklin, and today we have Mort Fertel. He is the creator of Marriage Fitness, a relationship renewal system that has been used by millions of people in marital crisis. In addition to his success with couples, he's also pioneered the Lone Ranger track, which helps people with an abstinent spouse a path to reconciliation. Mort, thank you for being on the show today. I wish I could have found you about 5.5 years ago. I could have used your services. I found myself going through a divorce. And of course, no one believes that they're going to go into a marriage only to find themselves at divorce. But I found that to be a period of time where I was looking for a lot of answers. I was desperately trying to save the relationship. I didn't have the tools at the time to do that. And we talked right before the show when you came on. I said, what's your outcome for this show? And I said, if it's just one person in the listening audience that is able to take these tools and these strategies and implement them in their relationship and save just one marriage, we've done our job here today, and it was well worth the time. But hopefully we have a bigger impact than that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So how did you end up in this lane? I know you're married with 5 kids. Had you gone through a divorce? What brought you here?
Yeah, so we went through our own marital crisis, which thank God did not end in divorce. That's how I got here. You
were one of the successful ones.
We figured out how to turn it around despite all the terrible advice that's out there about how to do that. And
go ahead. It's fascinating because I'd love to hear what some of the advice that you find counterintuitive, or not counterintuitive, but what advice is not helpful, because nothing I tried worked. So I don't know if it was bad advice.
Nothing we were trying was working either, because traditionally all the advice out there has you directing your time and energy at your problems, right? That's the question that's asked when you go to therapy. What's wrong? We're coached, right, that we should understand the difference between Mars and Venus, right, as if we're on 2 different planets. And we found that the more we focused on what was wrong, the more we were mired in all the negativity of our situation. We were coming out of the therapist's office feeling worse than we had when we went in. And this was supposed to be helping, and it wasn't helping at all. We got sick of repeating back to each other what the other was saying. We felt silly about that. We just found that the whole process was very unproductive. And for us, things really started to change. And we really started to turn things around when, instead of focusing on what was wrong and trying to fix it, we focused on trying to make new things right. And that really became the process by which we turn things around. And that really was the seed for the development of the whole marriage fitness program that we subsequently developed.
This show is about peak performance. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship. There's a very high percentage rate of divorce amongst entrepreneurs. We are very difficult to live with. With my clients, we roughly have about a 70% divorce rate. So either I cause a lot of divorces or entrepreneurship causes a lot of divorces. I'm going to stay with the entrepreneurship does. It's difficult, but we're a community here that isn't about surviving or making do. This is about peak performance. What makes for a top performing relationship and marriage?
That's a great question. I wish we had 30 hours instead of 30 minutes. There are dozens and dozens of principles and practices that drive a successful marriage. I think where to start answering that question is, before we get to the specifics, the most important thing initially to understand is that marriage is like anything else. It's like succeeding in business. It's like hitting a golf ball well. It's like arguing a case in court well. That is, there's a way to do it. And if we understand how to do it, and we practice that known successful methodology, then we'll be successful. And you can't, just as you can't expect to be successful on the golf course if you just grab a club and start whacking away with no idea how to hold it, how to swing, how to follow through it. Why would you think you'd be successful? That's what people are doing in marriage. Let's just try to make this work. As if we have these expressions, love is a mystery, and you have to be lucky in love. These are the lies of romantics. There's no mystery about it. And you don't have to be lucky. You have to be smart. There's a way to do it. And this is really the starting point. Before we even get into the details, just to appreciate that is already a game changer. Because most people don't understand it. Oh, we just grew apart. No, you didn't grow apart. There are specific things you're doing and your spouse is doing that's creating this dysfunction in the marriage and driving you to disconnection. And there are specific things you could be doing differently that would facilitate a reconnection. And so, there are universal laws of relationships, just like there are universal laws of gravity. If you understand gravity well, you can build a rocket ship and go to the moon. If you insist on denying the laws of gravity and you try to walk from the 17th floor of an apartment building to the 17th floor of the next building down the block without going downstairs, you're going to die.
So give us some of these laws of marriage.
Sure. So again, these are just examples. We just have a couple of minutes and there's dozens of them, right? It'd be like if somebody asked, LeBron James, give me the laws or the method of, being a great basketball player. 30 minutes wouldn't do it. So too here. But just as an example, so we have to learn to refrain from what I call the 3 C's. The 3 C's are criticize, condemn, and complain. Most people in marriage do it, and they do it a lot. And they mean well. Their heart's in the right place. They think it's going to help. They want it to help. They've maybe even thought about how they're going to deliver the criticism. But I ask everybody listening to do an honest assessment of their own life and their own relationships. And I think you'll find that it has never, ever helped. Nor will it. Criticize, condemn, and complain leads to a 4th C in marriage, which is called cancer of the marriage. It doesn't work. It's not productive. And we have to learn to refrain from the 3 C's. That's it. That would be one example. I'll give you another example. Entrepreneurs can appreciate this. Relationships require time. A lot of quality time. You would never dream that your business would be successful unless you invested a lot of time and energy into it. Because what we invest in is where we succeed and where we feel connected. It's no different than marriage. You can't invest all this time and energy in the courtship, hundreds and hundreds of hours in planning the wedding, and then no time into the marriage. It's just not going to work.
Well, it's like a lot of entrepreneurs, right? All the energy is put up front with the prospect. Then once I get the prospect, it's like now it's a customer, and now I can just kind of relax a little bit. Doesn't work that way for a long-term customer. Trying to keep a customer around for a couple of years is difficult if you stop paying attention to them and meeting their needs. And in a relationship that is hopefully 20, 30, 50, 70 years long, same thing comes up. It was interesting when you 100%. Were talking about, there's a way of doing it. And I love the golf analogy. I mean, if you hand somebody a golf club and just say, hey, go figure it out. Not only will they not do it properly, but they'll start to form habits, bad habits, which will be ridiculously hard to break. Right behind me, if they're watching this on YouTube and not the podcast, those books right there, there's about 12 of them right there, are the 5 love languages. And I love the book. You talked about quality time. I always say, what's your spouse's love language? I don't know. Well, what are you doing? You're just kind of throwing a dart up against the dartboard at that point. You have no idea what they're looking for and how they want that love delivered. And I love the fact that you said there's a way of doing it, and it takes time. And we're not given a manual.
So it's really important for all the entrepreneurs listening that, if you want your marriage to be successful, I know you're busy. I know, entrepreneurship is very difficult. But if you can't devote one night a week to your spouse, make that really sacred time, then you can't expect to have a great marriage. And in the end of the day, that failed marriage is going to end up terribly interfering with your ability to focus and work on your business.
Oh, I can attest to that one. Think about it. Hey, you know what? I want you to start a business, and I want you to deal with that business after 7 o'clock at night for about an hour or two. And I really don't want you to spend any time or devote any energy towards it. How successful is that business going to be?
Right.
It's going to go bankrupt.
Yeah.
Done. And that's what's happening with the marriages.
Under this umbrella of quality time, if I may, let me just give a few more quick examples. So we already gave the example of sacred time once a week. Also, there should be sacred time every evening, 15 to 30 minutes when you put the devices away, the kids are asleep, the TV is off, the computers are closed, and you're just focusing, talking with each other, unwinding the day, debriefing each other, hanging out, being together, a glass of wine, snuggling, just 15 to 30 minutes every day at the end of the day, and that's the close of the day. That's number 2. Number 3 is once a quarter, go away with your spouse, just the two of you, for at least a night or two. Doesn't have to be a whole long dramatic vacation to Paris or something. Just a night or two. You don't even have to go far, but out of the house, away from work, away from the kids, away from responsibility, just a romantic retreat once a quarter. And fourthly is a quick phone call in the middle of the day. Couple of minutes, not to talk about things have to be checked off the list and who's going to call the plumber or pay the bill, but a call just to connect, to share something cute, to just hang out on the phone with your spouse for a couple of minutes in the middle of the day. And the busier you are and the harder it is for you to do that, the more of a testify, more of a the more of a statement it is to your spouse.
I have a client that is very busy, successful entrepreneur. He goes, I'm killing myself Monday through Friday. I'm waking up early. I'm going to work. I'm making a great wage. I'm bringing it home. We have a beautiful home. We travel over the world and all that. And why doesn't she appreciate this? I said, because she's been number 2 for a decade.
There you go.
And it doesn't matter what you bring home, what you create. People will only stay in the number 2 slot for so long. She does appreciate it, but she doesn't appreciate being made number 2.
100%. Look, I do these full-day intensive house calls where I fly all over the world and spend a day with a couple in crisis. And I've been doing this a long time. And, to be frank, my fees are pretty significant. So the people I'm doing this with are, successful people.
Yeah.
I walk into these astounding houses. I mean, spectacular, unbelievable the way these people are living, the houses. But there's no home.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's empty.
Yeah.
And it's meaningless.
Yeah.
And one of the first things typically these people say to me is, Mort, everybody else thinks that we have it made. But they tell me, because they let me into the realness of what's going on, they would give it all away to just have some peace and love and to feel like they're number 1 in each other's lives.
Yeah. I was going through your website, and the first thing that struck me was, as I'm reading through some of these questions that you've got some resources on how to do certain things. And I'm looking at this, I'm saying, wait a second, this is not about building a marriage or rebuilding a marriage. This is about human relationship. This is every single one of these questions that I'm getting ready to ask you really could be applied to a business or any human relationship. So
100%.
The first one is how to build or rebuild trust, right? I mean, so important in every aspect of our lives, especially in a marriage. How do you rebuild that trust?
So there are 3 pillars of trust. We only have a short period of time here, so I'm going to pick.
We'll take the 30,000-foot view or answer, and then we'll give them resources to go to your website and dig deep.
I'm going to pick one, and even that one, I'm going to give a very abbreviated description of it. But one of the pillars of trust, I think it's the most interesting one, is to be beyond suspicion. This is interesting because most people think that in order to be trusted, I just have to do the right thing. I can't make a mistake. That's not true. You don't have to make a mistake to breach the trust in your marriage. You just have to look like you're making a mistake. Suspicious behavior destroys the trust in a relationship. And our responsibility is not only to do the right thing, but it's to be beyond suspicion. And so we have to ask ourselves as we go throughout our day, is it possible that this could be suspicious? And if so, we might have to modify our behavior. I'll give you a great example in today's world. Password protected cell phones where the spouse doesn't know the password. I mean, are you hiding? People say, I'm not hiding anything. It's not the point.
Yeah.
The question is not whether or not you're hiding anything. The question is not, am I entitled? No, it's suspicious. It's just suspicious.
Yeah.
It's just one random example.
Yeah.
What I do?
I've gone to the extreme of that one, or maybe not the extreme, but I would say, look, if you're in a relationship and your spouse or significant other won't hand you their phone, if your phone's dead or something, it's like, here, use my phone. Here's the password. Use it. If they freak out a little bit by you grabbing their phone, something's not the way it should be.
100%.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
It's if you can't hand your phone to your and you might not be doing anything wrong, so to speak, but there's something on that phone that you're not proud of. So, well said.
That's the second pillar of trust, to be beyond suspicion, and something that people often don't appreciate.
Yeah. I love this. I can't wait for the answer on this one. I've never had an affair, but I love this question. How to ruin an affair. How do you do that? I guess there's a bunch of different ways, but I can't wait to hear the answer of this one.
I apologize. That's a tough one for a podcast because there's really not one simple silver.
Oh, okay. All right. But I saw it on your website. It's like, hey, find out how to ruin the affair. I was like, I couldn't let that question go.
Yeah. It's a whole system.
Oh, okay. There's a whole attack plan involved here. I think, there's a call them off. Give us a little bit of the information on, if there is one going on. I'm sure there's a couple listeners out there that
I'll give you one small piece of it.
All right.
Very, very often when people are being betrayed, their spouse is having an affair. Understandably, they retreat from the relationship because they're emotionally vulnerable, they're being rejected, they're being betrayed. It's understandable.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that plays right into the flourishing of their relationship. Because let's say for example, it's a married man and a mistress. So the mistress never really thinks she's the mistress. She always thinks that the marriage is over or ending, or there's a separation or a pending divorce, or she's been told some story that allows her to think that she's not a mistress, but that this man is available. In most cases, not in every case, but in 98% of the cases. And so when the wife, I'm just in this example, when the wife retreats from the relationship, it just validates for the mistress that the marriage is at least emotionally over, if not technically over, and that this man is available. And so it's important not to do that. It's important instead to take a tremendous amount of initiative to try to reconnect with your spouse. It's hard to do. We talk in the program about how to do that. But put that aside, how difficult it is for a second. It's important to do it. And when you do that, then the mistress feels the presence of the betrayed in the relationship, which ruins her story that this man is available and that the wife is not trying. And so it's important for that effort to be made.
Yeah, and when you retreat, the other partner goes, see, it is ending, it is falling apart, and it just starts that cycle. One retreats, what does the other do? Retreats, and it just gets further and further apart. So interesting. Now, here's one that is a great one that clients ask me all the time. I'm like, good luck with that try. And that is, I'm doing everything. It's my spouse. She or he's the issue. How do I change them?
Yeah.
I chuckle every time I hear that, because it's like, if you figure out the answer to that one, that is going to be one hell of a business model. Yeah.
So first of all, we already talked about how not to do it.
Yeah.
Criticize, condemn, and complain will never work. And I know you can confess all of your spouse's sins, and I'm sure you're accurate about how you would describe them. I'm sure your spouse is not perfect and they've contributed to the downfall of your marriage. But I've never, ever seen a situation where there's not dual responsibility.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask. It's hard, but you have to ask, what's my fixing?
Yeah.
How did I contribute to this mess?
Yeah.
What could I do differently? And asking those questions honestly, answering those questions accurately, and then employing principles and practices that can address that fixing. That's the greatest thing you can do to inspire your spouse to change.
I absolutely love that because through my divorce, I was working very hard and diligently to fix it, make it better. That she unfortunately was had already made up her mind years ago. So as I was trying, I was just hitting a wall. But the first thing I wanted to know, and the last thing I wanted to know, was, what role did I play? Where could I have shown up better? Because I never want to do this again, end up in a divorce situation. And I was hell-bent on figuring out how to become a better version of me on the other side. And I spent a lot of time and really did a lot of self-evaluation, read a lot, learned a lot, asked a lot of questions, was extremely vulnerable because I knew there were pieces that I didn't see and I needed to be a better version. And it's one of the gifts that I asked for. I said, all right, fine, it's over. Please help me become better. I never got any answers. And for a while, it kind of bothered me that, I didn't get, that valuable kind of insider information. But she never shared anything. Never, said you should have done this, this, and this. And then I just realized that, that's okay. Continue on the path. And who I am today and how I show up in relationships is completely different than I did before.
I commend you for that. That's awesome, awesome attitude. That's really the way to do it. It's unusual.
Is it? Okay.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
Most people, when they exit a marriage, are pointing the finger at their spouse.
Yeah.
And that's why everybody knows the divorce rate in first marriage is 50%.
Yeah.
You know what it is in second marriages?
70.
Third marriages?
80.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now that's counterintuitive. How could that be? We would think, these are all people. I'm never making that mistake again. I've learned my lesson.
Yeah.
But in most cases, people have not learned their lesson.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why you have a higher concentration of people that have failed in marriages, in these second and third marriages, making the same mistakes that they made. Eventually, they realize that the one thing in common in all these failed relationships
is them. Absolutely. One of the questions I would have loved to ask you, 6 years ago is how to stop a divorce. What can we do? You're finding yourself going down that road. You may or may not be separated. You want to make it work. How can you stop it?
So again, big questions, and
well, these are on your website, so you kind of made it easy for me.
Great questions. Great questions. I'm just being honest. I can only
that we can't. We're not going to get to the bottom of it.
But I'll offer your audience this one slice. If your spouse is trying to exit a marriage, they can only do that with one thing in hand. They need a story. And that story is what they're telling themselves to justify the exit. And guess who the villain of that story is? It's you. Your job is to ruin that story. It's to turn that villain into a prince. And if you can do that, you shut the door to the exit. Now, of course, that raises a huge question. How do I do that? Now, we kind of touched on it just a moment ago when we talked about, working on your fixing. But if you can really understand how you've contributed to the downfall of the marriage, why it's failed because of you, fix those issues, you essentially will be ruining your spouse's story, and they won't have a justifiable exit plan.
Yeah. I found that to be very true. Let me ask you this. This is something that I was told, I don't know, or I read it. I'm not really quite sure. Definitely told, not quite sure if I read it, that men are more like a dimmer switch. Women are more like a light switch. And when the lights go out, it is very difficult for them to turn that switch back on. Men will come back easier from I'm falling out of love or no longer in love to getting back in love. It's an easier way back, where when a lot of the women tend to turn the switch off, I'm done, there's no coming back from I'm done. What's been your experience? I hope I explained that.
I understand what you're saying, but I have not found that to be the case.
Okay.
I understand what you're describing. I don't think you're describing, in my experience, you're not describing so much the difference between men and women, but you are describing a personality distinction. Like I hear the personalities, the different personalities you're describing.
Not men and women, but
I haven't seen it to be a gender distinction.
Okay.
But I think it's important to realize, though, that regardless of the personality type, in my opinion, there's no such thing as too far gone. There's no such thing as a relationship too much has happened. The quality of one's relationship is always much more dependent upon how they conduct themselves in the future than it is about how they conducted themselves in the past. And if you just think about that statement for a moment, I think it's self-evident that is true. I mean, up until this point, I think we're having a very nice, professional, cordial, enjoyable conversation. And I hope that's resulting in you, having some decent and warm feelings towards me. But imagine, but that's our past. Now imagine if all of a sudden I started to use obscenities on your podcast, or I started to make funny faces into the video camera, or all of a sudden I just acted in ways that was like really odd and embarrassing for you. So your opinion, your feelings towards me would switch in a moment. Even though we've been on this podcast now for, I don't know, let's say 20 minutes, if I behave that way for 30 seconds, it would change your view of me. Now, logically, that doesn't make sense. 20 minutes versus 30 seconds, it shouldn't change it that much. It's not logical, it's psychological. The 30 seconds was much sooner, it was more recent. So so that recent experience trumps the old stuff. It's an extreme example.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that, as you were saying that, even if that, well, first of all, the first two examples I would have found fun. The acting weird, maybe that would have been put me off a little bit. But the first two they explained, I was like, oh, I still like the guy. But what's interesting is, even if that weird behavior or inappropriate behavior was in the past, I think human nature is we always tend to remember that, oh, but wait, he's been great. But remember, 20 years ago, he attacked you or he did this to you. I think we have a tendency to remember things that don't fit our model or that upset us in the past.
I think that's particularly true, though, if there hasn't in the meantime been new positive experiences.
Yeah.
I think if in the meantime there have been new positive experiences, then we rebuild the goodwill, we rebuild the trust, we rebuild the warmth, and the new stuff tends to trump the old stuff. I believe that's my experience. And that's why there's always hope for a relationship.
You are really good at working with couples that are having a difficult time. What about the couple that is saying, you know what, we're doing okay. There's no affairs, there's no fighting there. We're kind of growing into roommates here. The stuff that your programs, your resources, how not valuable, but how applicable is some of that material to help a couple that's in a quote unquote good place, mediocre place, okay place? Does your programs help elevate their relationship, or are you just kind of the guy that comes in and fixes the broken one?
Well, you can't give someone an answer to a question they don't have. And so 99.99% of the people that utilize my resources are people that are in crisis. That's not to say that they couldn't be utilized by people that are not, but people that are not in crisis don't think they need it until they're in crisis.
I guess I am the weird one, because we actually went to a marriage counselor decades before, and I said, hey, these people are experts at relationships. Let's go figure out how to make a relationship even better. It's a good relationship. And it's kind of funny, we walked out actually in a worse place than when we went in. It was like, that was a good idea, but in hindsight, it was a really lousy idea. So I'm always looking about, I want to take good and I want to make it spectacular. And I guess I'm just in the minority about that. I know I'm in the minority about that.
Particularly when it comes to relationships. A lot of people will have that attitude about their golf game or their business.
Yeah, right.
But not too many people have that attitude about their marriage.
No, and I found part of it was, I think she felt a little criticized about it too. You know, well, why? You think there's something wrong? No, there's nothing wrong. And at that point, in my mind, there was nothing wrong. It just, how do we get it better? It can always be better. Let's have more fun. Let's be more playful. Let's be more connected. Let's be more sensual towards each other.
By the way, it's interesting. A few moments ago, you were describing people that were roommates. And you were at the same time describing them as not in crisis and not really needing Fertel. But people that are living as roommates
are in crisis.
They're just a hair's breadth.
Yes.
From a crisis.
Yep. You're right. I agree with you. Yep. If there's a crack in the dam,
it happened very quickly.
Yep. I did, and we did not, or I did not. Well, I know you've got a free gift for the audience. I think you've got a 7 steps or 7 secrets to fixing your marriage. You can head over to Mort's website. All the information is in the material, the content. What am I saying here? It's in the printed stuff, the written word stuff below here in the podcast and here on the audio as well in the bio section. So, Mort, I really appreciate you coming on. Again, I wish I found you a few years ago, but it is my hope today that someone listening here is going to take this information, head over to your website, check out all the material and resources that you have there, And like I said, if we could save one marriage, I feel like we've done our duty today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.